And warm and friendly hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Visa Family Podcast, and we've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by Rob Donaldson. He does great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets, and he's going to be joining me to talk about what we've seen over the last few weeks in college basketball, the fact that we have this lingering court case in which we've got guys trying to be able to get like a 6+ year of eligibility, and what that means for just the landscape of college basketball, why you don't want to be doing way too early top 25s or anything like that as of right now, some of the talent that we still have in the transfer portal as well, and just some of the teams that he feels like are getting it right here in the offseason. So we're going to be chatting with him about that here in the next few minutes, as I've been doing a lot of 2-segment podcasts. If you do have a question that you want answered on this podcast, I will set aside a segment for it, so anything that you want me to talk about on this podcast, questions, comments, segment ideas, what have you, you've got one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is by Twitter/X timeline at Jude_D1. Keep in mind, letters DM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. Then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, as did not get in any of those questions today, but we did have quite a few transfer moves that happened in college basketball on Monday, so I will recap those as well. And how about if we do just dive in right on it, as everything is brought to you by Edge Boost over at edgeboost.bet. They're making sure that bettors are able to access their funds 24/7, 365, because unlike a lot of places that run on credit, what have you, this is a bank account, and they make sure that you're able to get cashback rewards when you use Edge Boost as well. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, utilize that promo code of Greg, that is GREG. You're going to get a $1 for $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. And now let's talk with our good friend Rob Donaldson. He does a great job over on his YouTube feed, youtube.com/Rob Donaldson, of taking a look at college basketball, baseball, and so much more. And you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at RobDFB. And Rob, great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And, you know, like I always say when I hop on this college basketball podcast during the April, May, June months, you know, it definitely pays to kind of keep tabs on what's going on with the transfer portal, how these coaches are building their rosters. And, yeah, I appreciate having me on, man.
I appreciate you joining me. And what do we make out of some of these ancient guys trying to get back into the game in college basketball? Because we saw on Monday, Chad Baker-Mazara. He's apparently going to be back for his age 35 season. I'm obviously joking when I say age 35, but feels like he's that old in college basketball. And you've got these guys who played 5 years at the college level trying to be able to get your number 6, your number 7 of eligibility. And it's just wild because we don't know what we're going to get, because as much as we want to think, oh, there's no way that these guys are going to get eligibility, the way that the court is just handing the NCAA's L's upon L's like they're the Washington Generals, I just can't rule anything out at this point.
And what we saw last year when it came to NCAA tournament time, the oldest teams, whether it was in the conference tournament circuit or in the actual national tournament circuit, whether it was a national championship, you know, Final Four, Elite Eight, or the NIT, it was the older teams that kind of felt like they were the most successful once it got in the later stages. And if this court case does go through and some of these players like an Elijah Hawkins or, you know, a number of other guys who are Bent Luchin, a million different dudes who have kind of entered the portal without any real idea of whether or not they're even playing college basketball next year, it's going to be very interesting to see where these guys kind of land.
Yeah, it is very interesting to say the least. And I think that that's why it's just so difficult right now to be having sort of, shall we say, expectations of these teams trying to come up with like a way too early top 25. I just don't think that that's anything that we can be doing right now until we know it's all going to be shaking out, because anyone that's trying to do their way too early top 25, they're going to need to be revising that not just by the day, but by the hour, in my opinion, with the way that everything has been going through and with the way that we had north of 2,400 guys enter into the portal.
And again, it's not even like it's just like the 7th, 8th guys that are kind of still lingering out there in the portal. No, if this court ruling goes through, you know, the entire landscape of college basketball is truly going to change, because amply talented guys are just going to suddenly be available where in past years that wouldn't have been the case. So it's super hard to judge right now. We kind of know, you know, these rosters are starting to fill out at least a little bit, and we have an idea of kind of what to expect from just their current base. But yeah, you know, this ruling changes 1 week from now, and all of a sudden we're looking at these teams, and all of a sudden these sleeper teams just emerge out of nowhere, I think.
Yep, and I know that Ian Shefflin is one of those guys that is in the transfer portal as well. If he's one of those guys that's able to get some eligibility, I think that guy could be a big-time difference maker. And who knows? Maybe you'll have other guys come out of the woodwork that maybe they were done for a few years being like, oh, why not? Let's have Tim Tebow play quarterback over at Florida. It's like age 40 season. So, I mean, I do think that there's a lot of intrigue there. And man, it is going to be very fascinating to say the least what happens on that front, as we do have Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the Rob's Best Bet show, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And while that is of intrigue, what else is of intrigue is where these guys are starting to land. As we saw Duke get into the game, they're going to be bringing in Cedric Coward, which I think that that's a good ad for them. Obviously, I don't think that he's going to be like a 20-point per game scorer or anything like that over at Duke. The fact that Marcus Millender is heading on over to Georgia, that was one that stood out to me as well. But what have you just made out of these guys that have committed over the last few days? Because it does feel like coming off the board, we've got more of those ancillary pieces. And while you might not be getting some of these guys that are putting up like 20 points per game or anything like that, I do think that some of the ads that we've seen over the last 24 to 48 hours are very important. And our guys are going to be contributors on good teams.
Yeah, you talked about one of them and Chad Baker-Mazara going out to USC and Eric Musselman. I mean, that's an amazing get. And, my Iowa Hawkeyes, we added Alvaro Figueres, and he was a fantastic player in the Horizon League last year, both defensively and offensively. They kind of needed a stretch 4 or that hybrid between a 4 and a 5, and they got that guy. And I really like what a lot of these teams have been doing in terms of these initial front-end ads. And a lot of these teams, like a USC, for example, they lost everybody from last year, seemingly. Every single person either entered the portal, is a graduate transfer, or just graduated period, or are kind of seeking that next year of eligibility if you're a guy like a Rashawn Agee. And that just means that, hey, we're going to maybe finally see kind of Eric Musselman cultivate his team here in year 2, maybe tailor some things, maybe correct some things that went wrong last year. But at the moment, they're very athletic, they're very long, and they're just kind of maybe a piece away at the guard spot to really get things done.
Oh, I'm right there with you. I do think that it's going to be really intriguing to see what we get out there. And then another Big Ten team, because you were talking about Iowa. How about the fact that Illinois picks up Andrei Stojakovic, a guy that I feel like has a lot of upside, but he was just sort of, shall we say, lost in the shuffle over at Cal, putting up big numbers, but nobody was taking note because Cal was just not so good over the last few seasons. I think that that's going to be a big-time pickup out there for a Big Ten team in Illinois, that they were one of the first to really decide, hey, we're actually going to utilize the transfer portal, unlike a lot of these Big Ten teams who have now come along for the ride over the last 2 off seasons.
Yeah, and also another move that they made this offseason was adding a Visich from Arkansas, who was kind of a guy who, at the front end of the beginning of the SEC schedule last year at Arkansas, had some issues, had some growing pains with just kind of adapting his game. He's a stretch 5 type of guy with a lot of athleticism, a large wingspan, and
teams up with his brother.
Right, and now all of a sudden it looks like, okay, they've got some really nice pieces that are both versatile, both athletic, and it doesn't really feel like one of those guard-heavy, athletic, wiry teams that we've seen Brad Underwood kind of feature over the past decade, whether it's at this stop or Oklahoma State or even SFA. And I'm very intrigued on kind of what happens the rest of the way here, especially because I don't think they're done adding through the portal. And especially if something does happen with this court ruling, that's a team that I think is going to be a very attractive destination for a lot of these kind of grad transfer guys.
No doubt about it. And I think the biggest thing is not only are they not done adding in the transfer portal, I think that there's a lot of teams that are just frankly not done in general with how many guys we do have in the transfer portal. As joining me on the show, we do have Rob Donaldson of the Rob's Best Bet show joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, because as I take a look right now, 2,544 players entered in the transfer portal this offseason, and there are going to be some guys that they just frankly don't find a home, because this includes some of the walk-ons, some of the jobber guys that are averaging like 1 point per contest and everything like that. But I do think that with regards to taking a look at things in college basketball, I think it's going to be intriguing to see when these guys do come off the board, because if I were a college basketball player, I would honestly wait a little bit of time, because there's going to be some teams that get desperate, that have some NIL money, and they're going to throw it at someone like, Great Osabor, Coleman Hawkins, because it's like, there's very few good guys left on the board, and we need to pay someone. So I do think that I would probably be taking that approach. But how much do you want to take a look at the timing of when these guys do come in? Because I do think that some of these teams that that bring in these late May, early June additions, these guys that come in the summertime rather than here in March/April, I think that those teams are behind the eight ball. And I just have noticed over the last few seasons, these teams that bring in the big time guys later on in the process rather than earlier on typically have the least amount of success.
It's very interesting because there's a saying that kind of goes around in recruitment circles, and for a long time it was kind of high school guys and recruiting your high school class, but dudes recruit other dudes. And if your transfer portal class doesn't feature a dude early on in the process, well, then maybe other top, transfer guys, maybe even top end high school recruits are going to think otherwise about transferring to your school. But if you're a team like in Oklahoma, for example, that goes out and lands a Nigel Pack early and lands a Xavier Brown early, all of a sudden other transfers and guys that are kind of thinking about your school might be a little bit more tempted to say, you know what, I can see these two guards in this offense featuring well. I kind of want to be a part of that. But what happens to a lot of these mid-major guards and a lot of mid-major players, for the most part, that I see enter the portal over the last 2 years, is they end up just doing a lateral transfer because they jump into the portal right away. They don't get those early bites because better players are getting swooped up, and then their previous team already added a player to fill their current roster spot because you got to field the team. You got to go try to get your best guys, and now a lot of people are kind of left out in that ether of, I don't know where to go. And that's the dark side of this portal that I think largely gets ignored. But at the same time, to your point, some of these teams that do kind of get the quote-unquote scraps of the transfer portal are going to sometimes end up with pretty good players. I mean, that's kind of what we even saw with like a Coleman Hawkins last year when he went to Kansas State after the NBA didn't turn out well.
Yeah, and that is going to be so interesting as well with regards to the guys that have NBA draft decisions, because I do think that that's going to be one of the biggest things as well. Now, I know that there are some guys that are still a little bit on the fence with regards to their NBA future. The NBA Combine invitations, I think, are going to be very big as well, because if you have a guy that doesn't get an invitation to the NBA Combine, they're probably going to be coming back to school. But I think that makes things so interesting, and I think that you'd agree with me on this as well. A lot of guys that typically we would see them go into the NBA draft and stay in the NBA draft in past years have been coming back because of the NIL, and because if you're not guaranteed to be a first-round pick, if you might fall to like the early second round, back in the day, that might be lucrative for you. You're able to start your NBA clock, but if you're able to get that NIL money in college, that actually outweighs that, and you might be able to climb up the draft board as well.
Yeah, it's really turned into, college sports in general have really turned into a pretty successful, financial medium for these college-aged athletes. I mean, we just saw the NFL draft take place, right? And there were a number of guys who fell all the way down to the day 3 of the draft. I think of a Quinn Ewers from Texas University, where if he would have entered the portal, he probably would have got paid $4 million. And instead, he's actually taking a massive pay cut year over year to go play in the NFL. And similarly with the NBA, there are not that many rosters.
Shedeur Sanders is taking a pay cut.
100%. And there's going to be a number of different players over the next, years that are going to be in that same boat, because games don't always translate from the college ranks to the professional version of that sport. And a lot of teams in the college level do have a lot of money and want to acquire talented guys, regardless of whether or not you're an NBA player or just great for the college game. I do think that once the money just keeps filling up these NIL pools, we're going to see more and more players kind of carve out a career in college before actually trying to make a jump to the professional ranks.
I mean, Drew Timme was the first example of this, a guy that could have easily went to the NBA, but he probably would have been either a late second-round pick or a free agent, and he left like 2 or 3 years earlier, but he has really set the standard for a lot of these guys, and a lot of guys are falling in that blueprint as well, and I think that's all the bigger for big men as well, because we have seen it with the likes of, I just mentioned Drew Timme, Oscar Tshiebwe, and you saw it with Kofi Cockburn a few seasons ago as well. These guys that maybe don't have the bodies, don't necessarily have the game that a lot of NBA prospects are looking for, but they're really good in college. And I think that that's led to so many of these big men just sticking around in school rather than these guards that they get swooped up and they are very much coveted by these NBA teams as well.
And especially when you measure the expectations, right? Because if you're kind of a fringe, maybe second round pick or even a late first round pick in the NBA, maybe you get 10 minutes your first year and all of a sudden your career trajectory is only 3 years extended. But hey, if you're a sophomore or a junior in college and all of a sudden now you're guaranteed 5 years of eligibility, well, you can actually carve out your career instead of just a 3-year career in the NBA to a guaranteed 6 years with college and the NBA, getting to play basketball on top of also getting a degree. And that's where I feel like there is a market inefficiency for a lot of this NBA aspiration stuff. And I do feel like that the teams and the programs and the NILs that are really fully functioning at a point where players are starting to catch on to it, my goodness, they're going to have a chance to really show themselves as not only the NBA pipeline like the Dukes and the Kentuckys used to be, but also just a way to actually get paid and make a career out of the game of basketball.
Absolutely. And Rob, I do want to get your thoughts here because you always do a great job of lending a little bit of light on this. When I do ask, we've seen quite a few moves here in the transfer portal and these coaching moves over the last few weeks, and obviously we've got a lot to go, but are there a few teams out there, whether that be at the major conference level, the mid-major conference level, what have you, that you just take a look at the moves that they made, you like the moves, and you feel like they deserve a little bit more love than what they've been getting?
You know, there's a lot of teams that I've really fallen in love with, and even, you know, I've highlighted Oklahoma on this episode and even in prior episodes as well. But again, I'm kind of buying into the coaching side of things early on in this transfer portal cycle, especially with this looming sort of deal on the back end of whether or not there's going to be players reemerging into the portal all of a sudden. But I look at Ole Miss and Chris Beard, and I get it. AJ Storr was a guy who kind of turned into an NIL disaster story, if you will, based on last season. And Corin Johnson, very similarly, he goes to Louisville, doesn't get the ultimate playing time, but still has, some sparks that he shows. Corey Chest, very similar at LSU. And I just feel like when you add this many talented athletes to a roster that's already expected to be pretty darn good as well, with a great head coach in the sport, I'm very intrigued to see how Ole Miss kind of carves out these final stages of their transfer portal class. And especially if they're able to get one of these kind of 5-year eligibility guys on the back end, I really do think that Ole Miss is going to be one of those teams that we look at the back end of next season and say, yeah, I wasn't surprised that they made a Final Four or an Elite Eight, because I really do think they're kind of carving in that right direction right now.
I do think so as well. And Chris Beard just knows what the heck he's doing as a coach. He had Ole Miss into the Sweet 16, and they darn near made the Elite Eight. They were absolutely tremendous, and they were doing that with no rebounding last year as well. Like you were mentioning Corey Chest, if he could give them anything whatsoever down low, that is going to be an upgrade to what they had in past seasons as well. And what's always an upgrade on this podcast is getting you aboard, Rob, because you do such an incredible job taking a look at this wonderful game of college basketball. Let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, Greg, it's always a blast to come on here and talk hoops with you, especially when there's nothing really going on in terms of actual game action at the moment. And, for those who are wanting to follow my baseball bets leading up to the college basketball season, or my college basketball bets once it's actually in season, you can do so on my Twitter/X page at RobDFB, and also on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Rob Donaldson. But as always, Greg, I appreciate having me on, man.
Always great to be able to get Rob aboard. He does such an incredible job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. And every single time he joins, we lend such great insight. So big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, let's recap all the news and notes we saw in college basketball on Monday. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to get Rob Donaldson aboard. He does such great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights, and he did so once again today. So big thanks to Rob for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. This seems like a really good fit for both this year's Texas A&M team and would have been a good fit on last year's Texas A&M team, because Texas A&M last year, they could not shoot threes to save their lives, but they're going to be bringing in a man from NC State by the name of Marcus Hill. He, 2 seasons ago over at Bowling Green, was a 20-point per game scorer, has never really been a good three-point shooter, but guy that's able to give you some handles, guy that's able to do a nice job driving off the ball, is able to generate a few turnovers. He's joining Buckyball, which they've added quite a few good three-point shooters like Jakari Lane, Josh Holloway, and you've got some good versatility with Mackenzie and Bakbo coming in as well. So I really like the well-roundedness of Texas A&M. I'm still a little bit unsure of how these pieces are going to be coming together, but I do think that Bucky McMillan doing a solid job of getting things set up here. I think that LaSalle is having themselves a nice offseason as well. Obviously, they move on from Fran Dunphy. You see a regime change, and now they're going to be looking to go a little bit bigger. As Noah Collier, he was over at William & Mary last year. He didn't just get William, he didn't just get Mary, but he got both, and now he's going to be be exploring things, as he is going to be becoming a LaSalle explorer. Last season was able to average about 12 points, 5 rebounds per contest, and was able to up his range just a little bit. Not a guy that you want shooting a bunch of threes or anything like that, but he joins the LaSalle roster that, boy, oh boy, they are chock full of a bunch of just pure scorers in general. This is going to be a team that's going to be very versatile. You've got Truth Harris coming on over from Radford. They bring in a guy in Jaden Marshall I would like over at Niagara. Jerome Brewer Jr. was rock solid over at McNeese, a guy with some upside there. Justin Archer is going to be able to man things down low. They feel like a poor man's Noah's Ark. They've got two of everything. I don't know if they're an amazing two of everything, but Josu Grion coming over from UT Martin, he was a dynamite scorer as well. I think that they've got some very interesting pieces. Again, I don't know who's necessarily going to be that go-to guy for them or anything like that, but they do have some interesting pieces. And then out there in the Atlantic 10, you've also got Tyler Cochran, who's going to be added to Rhode Island. I think that this is a nice upside get. He just did not hit the floor at all last season over at Minnesota, but 2 years ago at Toledo, was able to average 14.5 points, 6.5 boards, darn near 2 steals per contest. Cochran has been an 18-plus point per game scorer in his career over at Northern Illinois and places like that, and I do think that this is a solid gift for a Rhode Island team that they need to bust through now, because the last few seasons it has been very disappointing for them, to say the least. They just have not been able to find it under Archie Miller, and I mean, they had a lot of promise going into conference play last season. They just fell really short in the Atlantic 10. Well, they've got a lot of teams that are just stacking up talent, but you're bringing a guy like a Miles Corey, RJ Johnson in the backcourt, and I think that this team is going to be relatively solid there. Lacking a little bit of something down low, but Kian Edejiri coming over from Northern Illinois should be able to help them out a little bit as well, so I like this pickup for them. And then I do like Blake Harper heading on over to Creighton. Hopefully Creighton is going to be willing to go with more than a 5-man rotation, but Harper, a nice go-to scorer last season, 19.5 points, 6 boards, 3.5 assists, steal per game. He was a freshman last season as well, so he's going to be able to give you some nice versatility in that he's also able to shoot about 40% from three-point range. Again, Creighton, for the love of Pete, give us more than a 5-man rotation, but that said, this is a Creighton squad that is going to be quite talented. They do have a few backcourt pieces returning from a season ago as well. Obviously, they're going to be looking a little bit new look themselves, but for Creighton, they've done a nice job bringing in Owen Freeman, Josh Dix on over from Iowa as well. So it's a pretty locked and loaded lineup, and I do think that there's quite a bit of upside with these guys, and I do think that there's quite a bit of upside here as well, as you've got a former gentleman of UNC Greensboro, Mason So, heading on over to Mount St. Mary's. He was a little bit of a reserve big man, a guy that, shall we say, trying to be able to find his game a little bit more as well. He's not going to be coming in with overly much fanfare, but that's it for Mount St. Mary's. I do think that they're starting to be able to build a little bit more depth, and hopefully for Mount St. Mary's, they're going to be a little bit more efficient on the offensive side of things this season, because the biggest thing for them last year was just the constant turnovers that they had, and I do think that they've done a good job of being able to address that with the guys that they've brought in via the transfer portal, with the way that they've been able to revamp this backcourt as well, and I do think that there's quite a bit of upside here, especially with bringing in Kevion McClain also into that backcourt from Texas Southern. So I do think that they've got a lot to be able to build around here, and I feel like this team is building something nice, as well as you've got Sam Alamatu going on over to Wright State. He was averaging about 5.5 points per contest, pulled in there north of 6 rebounds per game last season over at Vermont. For Wright State, it's a bunch that's just really lacked any sort of defense whatsoever. I've always been rock solid on the offensive side of things, and Alamatu probably not going to be able to give you any sort of versatility or anything like that. A little bit limited offensively, but the defense for this team, it is very, very much heading in the right direction, and things are very much heading in the right direction for this team, as Kasim Watson, he was over at Delaware State this last season, rock solid player, 15.5 points, CO per contest, 6 rebounds per game at 6'9". He is going to be heading on over to UTEP. UTEP's biggest kryptonite the last few seasons has been on the glass. He's got the sort of game of which he's going to be able to adapt to that UTEP style, because, I mean, under this coaching regime, they're looking to generate a whole bunch of turnovers. They are looking to be able to create a lot of havoc. He was able to do that over at Delaware State, so I think that this is a really good ad for them. Now, they do lose a few players like Corey Camper and company from that backcourt from a season ago, but for UTEP being able to have someone that will make sure that they don't get completely manhandled on the glass, that is going to be very good for them. They haven't added a whole heck of a lot here by the transfer portal quite yet, but you know that that's coming for UTEP, and I do think that this is very much a step in the right direction for them, and I also do think that this one is a step in the right direction as well, as you've got Louisiana transfer Hassana Kinji. He's going to be heading on over to UC Santa Barbara for the Gauchos, he should be able to provide something good down low for them. 6.5 boards, a block, 12 points per game. Not a guy that's going to light you up and pop it from 3-point range or anything like that, but for UC Santa Barbara, they do lose quite a bit from what they had a season ago, and being able to add someone like this for a team that year in and year out is one of the better teams in terms of hitting the glass at the mid-major ranks, I think that that's very important for them. And you've also got Mario Little, who's heading on over from Utah as well, so they haven't added a lot of guys via the transfer portal, but they've added a few good guys via the transfer portal, so you do like to see that. You do like to see the fact that Ty Harper is going to be heading on over to Oral Roberts as well. He was over at Youngstown State this last year, averaging about a steal, 10 points per contest, a guy that is very limited in terms of his three-point shooting, so I mean that doesn't necessarily fit the Oral Roberts mold, but that said, for Oral Roberts, they really need to crank it up on defense because they have been awful on that side of things over the last few seasons. This should allow them to be able to do so, so I do like the fact that they are starting to prioritize a little bit more defense, trying to go into a little bit of a new direction, and I think that this is big in terms of being able to do so. You've got Isaac Abidi. He was over at Cleveland State this last season, 6'8" gentleman that pulled in about 2 boards, 3.5 points per game. He's going to be heading on over to Albany. For Albany, they've been looking for a little bit more size to be able to beef up down low. It's been a little bit topsy-turvy in terms of defense, in terms of the rebounding over the last few seasons for them, and I think that they've done a great job here in the transfer portal, being able to bring in Ocheku Okeke from FIU. Florida International is big. They've got that go-to scorer in Will Richardson. F.A. Wes Ingram was over at Rider last season. Like, this is a really well-rounded team, even though they lost a lot of pieces in the offseason, and we've seen this team play a various amount of styles. Sometimes they're playing up-tempo, sometimes they're playing low and slow. I do think that this just iteration of Albany is going to be a rock-solid one, so I do like that add there. Cedric Coward, he last season was over at Washington State and just frankly got injured early on during the season. He played in 6 games, was averaging about 17.5 points per contest as a 6'6" combo player over at Eastern Michigan before he had an out over to Washington State as he followed pretty much the old coaching regime from Eastern Washington on over there. He was averaging about 15.5 points, 6.5 boards per contest at the mid-range ranks 2 seasons ago. Career mid-30s three-point shooter at 6'6". Good versatility for Duke. I think that he's probably not going to be quite as big of an add as what you had this past season, as Sion James was able to be a little bit of a do-it-all guy, but Cedric Coward, I think, is sort of cut from the same cloth as him. I don't think that he's going to have quite the same numbers, but that's being able to add a little bit of veteran leadership, being able to add his versatility. I think that that is a good get for Duke, and I think that this is a pretty good get as well. Brian Ndonja, he was over at Central Michigan last season. He has decided that he's going to be going on over to Canisius. Was averaging about 5.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game, 6'9", little bit of a combo player for Canisius, that team that, man, Canisius was rough on the glass. They had only one player that was averaging north of 3.5 rebounds per game. They got completely bludgeoned there. They were a relatively good shooting team, and this is not a guy that's going to be going out there and just laying you up from 3-point range or anything like that, but it's very clear that they needed to be able to add a little bit more size down low. He and Miles Wilmoth down low are going to be able to do that. You also bring in Marcus Snyblack, who was over at Jacksonville this last season. I like what Canisius is doing. Feels like they're very much heading in the right direction, and I feel like this team is adding a really nice piece as well. As you have Darion Reed, who was over at Alabama last year, 6'8" big man that gave the team 6 points, 3 boards per contest, a former top 25 recruit. He's going to be adding on over to Oklahoma, and for Oklahoma, a really nice on-conference portion of the season last year. Really, really bad conference portion of the season last year for Porter Moser. Was able to do enough to be able to get another year out there at Oklahoma, but you have to feel like this is a little bit of a put-up-or-shut-up year, and for Oklahoma, they're putting their money where their mouth is. They haven't necessarily brought in like the glut of guys that you would expect, but they're bringing in the right guys. They've got 4 guys that are coming in by the transfer portal. Tay Davis, a rock-solid, versatile player from Notre Dame. Xavier Brown was a good guard over at St. Joe's, and Nigel Pack, well, we know that he's able to pack in the stats when he was over at Miami, so I think that this is a really good get, and I do think that this Oklahoma team does have a lot of upside moving forward. And then Incarnate Word is bringing in a sharpshooter, Taj Savasky. He last season was over at Cleveland State, 12.5 points, 2.5 assists, shot a little bit over 36% from 3-point. He's heading on over to the Word, Incarnate Word, and for Incarnate Word last season, they were a really good 3-point shooting team. They're a team that they left a little bit of something to be desired with regards to that defense, but I do love the direction that this Incarnate Word team is heading in, because they did last year a situation where they brought in the Ball State transfers. They teamed up very well with one another, and for Incarnate Word, the NIL funds are starting to be there for them. They also bring in a double-figure score from Northeastern and Harold Woods. They could probably use a little bit more down low, but a step in the right direction for them. You've got Jeremiah Johnson, who last season, he was over at UW Green Bay, averaged 10 points per contest. Wasn't necessarily an amazing three-point shooter, but a guy that was able to pop it from three-point range, and he's going to be adding on over to Campbell. He's going to be playing for John Andrzejczyk, who he was one of the assistants for that Florida team that won the national title last season. For Campbell, a little bit slow going for them, and you do lose guys like Kobe Duggan and company from a season ago. That's just what happens when you've got a coaching change, but he and Quentin Mincy, I think, are going to be able to make a nice 1-2 punch. We shall see what else Campbell is going to be able to add in there, as they do have to replace much of the meat of their scoring from the season ago. But I do think that being able to bring in a versatile guard like that is very much a step in the right direction, and I think that this is very much a step in the right direction as well. So you've got Austin Maurer. He was over at Grand Canyon this last season, and he was a 7-footer that just didn't really see a lot of minutes because Duke Brandon and company were in the fold. But he has decided that he is going to be going to Seattle for Seattle. When this team is at full force, they are one of the better rebounding teams in all of college basketball. They do not allow you to be able to get second and third chances, and being able to bring in a guy like a Maurer who's able to give you that size unlike what they've really ever seen before, I think that is going to be able to help them out quite a bit moving forward. And if you take a look at the way that he was ranked coming out of the 2024 recruiting class, I believe that he was actually the number 1 recruit out there in the state of Oregon. He was a top 225 recruit, according to 247 Sports. So that's a nice upside guy that I think is going to be able to elevate the team. I think this guy is going to be able to elevate things as well. Juan Gorosito, he last season was over at Ball State, averaged about 9 points, steal per contest, shot 41% from three-point range. He's heading on over to a San Diego team that they were one of the worst teams in all of college basketball last year in terms of three-point shooting. Like, they just could not find anyone that could knock down a shot to save their lives. So being able to get this sort of an ad is big. And for some reason, Steve Lavin over the last few years, until this past off season, he just wasn't attacking the transfer portal at all. I think he realized, we need to bring in some guys, and they've actually done so. Like, I like what they've done thus far in the offseason. Ternari Lane was a double-figure scorer over at Georgia State. Dominique Bilford Tough was rock solid over at Southern Utah. Like, this is a nice core that they're bringing in. They need to add a big man or two, but you know what? Things are coming along for San Diego, and things are coming along for this team as well. You've got Amadou Doumbia. He was over at UMass this last season, was not necessarily a guy that saw a lot of minutes, but that said, he's going to be heading on over to a North Carolina A&T team that they need depth at this point. They were absolutely bludgeoned on the glass this past season. Now, when they suspended all their top scorers, that's when things actually got better for them defensively, so hopefully they keep that same energy. But this is someone that he comes in from the great state of Connecticut. I know that there was a little bit of fanfare around him coming into the season, just wasn't able to see a lot of minutes, but I do think that there's a lot of upside here, and I do like that ad for them. You've got Simon Hildebrand, who was over at High Point this last season. He was averaging about 5.5 points, 3.5 boards per contest as a 6'9" big man. He's decided that he's going to go to Washington State. Now, if Washington State is giving Hildebrand a whole bunch of minutes, then things have went horribly wrong for this team, but you know what? That's a little bit of depth that Washington State, they found out last year that they very much needed, because when Cedric Howard went out of the fold due to injury, that was when things got a little bit dicey for them, and being able to add him in along with Emmanuel Ugbo, who was over at Boise State, that's some relatively good talent right there. You would expect a team out there in the new look Pac-12 to be able to give you a little bit more, so they still have a few pieces that they need to pick up, but I mean, they're starting to head in the right direction there. And Georgia, they're very much heading in the right direction as they added a few guys. On Monday, they bring in Jordan Ross, who was a nice sharpshooter over at St. Mary's this last season. He was able to give the team 8.5 points, 2.5 assists per contest, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range. I don't think that he's going to be anything more than a depth piece, but when you were able to add him with a guy, Marcus Millender, who was a really good shooter, about 15 points, a little bit over a steal per contest. He was shooting over 40% from three-point range. I think that that's a good 1-2 punch. Now, for Georgia, it feels like they're going to be going a little bit more with regards to depth. I don't know if they're necessarily going to have that one guy on the roster that's going to give you like 20 points per game or something like that, but this is a team that's going to be very complete. If they want to go like 9 or 10 deep, I think that they have the propensity to be able to do so, and I really do like the way that Georgia has just been able to stack, shall we say, mid-tier talent all together over the last few seasons. They did that last offseason, like they're bringing in Justin Bailey, who was rock solid over at Wofford. I would say the biggest boomer bust guy is going to be Kenan Catchings, who he was over at BYU, a former top 50 recruit. I really like what they're bringing in, so that is going to be a team that's going to be quite deep this season. This is a team that's looking to add a little bit of depth as well, as you've got Dezane Mingo, who was over at Marshall last season. He's heading on over to Charlotte. He should be able to give Charlotte the efficiency that they're looking for. Charlotte, year in and year out, one of the best teams at not turning the ball over. For Mingo last season, 12.5 points, a little bit over 5 assists per game, shot in the low to mid-30s from three-point. His three-point shooting got better as the season went along, as frankly, everyone on Marshall got a little bit better as the season went along, but I do like that pickup for them, and I do like the fact that Christian Watson, who was over at Southern Miss this past season, he's heading on over to Hampton. For Watson, began his career over at Miami, where he was just flat out glued to the bench. Now, Watson, not a great three-point shooter, but was able to log for the team about 8 points, 4 boards, 2.5 assists. Should be able to give good versatility to a Hampton team that they were pretty rock solid on the defensive end last season. They didn't necessarily have the world's greatest guard play, and they're still going to need to add a little bit of three-point shooting, but he and Michael Ealy heading on over, as Ealy was over at Tulane last season, 2 seasons ago. Good score over at Siena. I do think that there are some good pieces putting in place, and I do think that Hampton has a little bit of upside thanks to these two adds, and I do think that this program has some upside as well. As you've got Adrian Myers, who last season was over at Mississippi State, did not see the floor because he was redshirting. He has decided that he is going to be going to San Jose State, and San Jose State has done a really good job of being able to find these guys that either play very limited or no minutes whatsoever at a higher level, and they're able to bring them in. They're able to get them just going in general, as Myers is a 6'6", a little bit of a versatile, shall we say, wing guy. When he was coming out, 247 Sports did rank him as a top 350 recruit. He was number 7 in the state that he was recruited from. I believe that he was over there in Virginia, so do think that he's going to be able to add just a little bit of a level of talent that this team didn't necessarily have a season ago. So I do think that that's a big one for San Jose State. And then Don McHenry, he has decided that he is going to be going to Utah. This is a good gift for Utah. He did a bit of everything over at Western Kentucky last season, 17 points, steal and a half per contest. Not a guy that's going to completely light you up from three-point range, but is able to do a nice job of just being able to get others involved. He's able to take the pressure off of so many of the other guys. And for Utah last season, they were very much a team that was good at being able to pound the glass. They were poor with regards to their defense along the perimeter. Don McHenry, he was part of Western Kentucky team that was one of the better three-point shooting defenses in all of college basketball, so he should be able to lend that in. He should be able to help this team out on that front, and I do think that this is going to be of help as well. So you've got Chad Baker-Mazara, who last season was over at Auburn, part of that team that made the Final Four. He was shooting north of 38% from three-point range, 12 points, 2.5 assists per contest. He is back for his 50th year of college basketball, and he goes to a USC team that, man, they have done a great job of being able to add guys. Rodney Rice is going to be coming in. That's a guy that's able to light it up from three-point range, and he's used to having a very big role for USC last season. Their main kryptonite, in my opinion, was the fact that they just weren't able to do a great job on the glass, and they did a nice job of being able to address that as they bring in Gabe Dines, who's one of the best shot blockers in all of college basketball. Now, it looks like Keontae Jones might be opting out of going to USC, and he's going to reopen his recruitment, and that hurts them because I do like his overall versatility. That came after the Chad Baker-Mazara news, but you've got Jaden Brownell, who at 6'9" was able to pop it well from three-point range over at Sanford as well. Really like the pieces that this team is adding. Norfolk State has added a relatively nice piece down low as well. Jacquel Morris, he last season was over at St. Peter's. He didn't average a lot of scoring, only about 3.5 points per contest, but gave the team 4.5 boards, a little bit over a block per game, played in just 18 games because he was a little bit banged up. He has decided that he's going to be going to Norfolk State. For Norfolk State, they just didn't seem like their normal selves down low last season, so being able to add a piece like this, I think, is going to be very critical for them, and I do like this Norfolk State team to once again be a big giant force out there in the MEAC. They are just the, shall we say, constant in terms of this conference, and they've always had relatively good guard play. The low post play sometimes can be a little bit shaky, and for Norfolk State, they've gotten a little bit of a slow go of it here in the transfer portal, but being able to add Deion Wright Ford along with Elijah Jamison in that backcourt, I like what they're doing right now. They're going to have a few pieces that are going to be back from a season ago as well, so I think that this is a big one, and I think that this is a very good ad for them. I do think that this is a relatively good ad as well, as you've got Joshua Ola Joseph. He was over at Cal last season, and he was pretty rock solid. 7.5 points, 3.5 boards, a mid-30s three-point shooter. He's going to be heading on over to Loyola Chicago. Should very much be able to fit the mold that Loyola Chicago is looking for. A guy that's able to give you a little bit of versatility, does a solid job on defense, is able to pop it from three-point range. I really like this ad for them, and I do like the fact that UC Davis is getting into the game as well. Marcus Wilson, he last season was over at Washington State, just could not see the floor. He was limited to just 4 games due to injury, so he redshirted last season, but as I said, he's heading on over to a UC Davis team that they need a little bit of everything, as they were inefficient on the offensive side of things. This is a bunch that they just weren't able to find a lot of three-point shooting in general. They were pretty good at being able to generate turnovers, but being able to add a guy like this and Mr. Wilson, who I think is going to be able to lend a lot for this team moving forward, I think that he's going to be able to do a nice job of being a little bit of an elevator, and this is a good buy low for them, in my opinion. I think that this was a really good buy spot as well, as you've got Andrei Stojakovic, who he was over at Cal this last season. When he was over at Cal, did a nice job being able to supply the team with about 18 points, a little bit over a block per contest. He was really able to go into takeover mode towards the back half of the season last year. He's always been a low 30s three-point shooter, but at 6'7", I think that he's going to be able to up that. And his father, Peja Stojakovic, was a really good three-point shooter in the NBA as well. So I do like what he's able to bring to the table, and I love the fact that I'm able to bring to the table this podcast for you every single day. If you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GNet_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, naming does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And a big thanks once again to our good friend Rob Donaldson of the Rob's Best Bets Show for joining me in my segment. And I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.